My teacher died yesterday. Fare thee well, BBC Focus on Africa, wrote Nana Kwaku Kumi, a human rights lawyer in Ghana. In 2023, after 60 years, the radio show was cut from the BBC budget. Out of a $5 billion annual budget, $30 million was cut from Africa programming. Instead, the BBC said it was focused on digital content, but research shows almost 70% of Africans regularly listen to the radio, whilst only 40% use social media and the internet to stay up to date. By focusing on digital content, the BBC is putting a price tag on the news. A cheap radio with solar panels can be taken anywhere and costs little. Internet access requires mobile data top-ups. Only 10% of African homes have a fixed internet connection. And then there is the issue of the new Africa content, Africa Eye, The Comb, Africa Live. This is a story of how the BBC lost touch with Africa.
BBC World Service at 15 hours GMT. This is Akwasi Sapon with Focus on Africa.
Focus on Africa is one of the most successful radio programs in Africa. It stood out from other stations. It was professional. It was rigorous. It was self-critical. Despite its colonial roots, it was not British propaganda, and it was not condescending, but it did promote critical thinking and a scientific worldview. In fact, it gave listeners a sense of Pan-African identity.
Pan-Africanism, the greatness of being an African.
Writing competitions celebrated African creativity. No wonder Kwaku Kumi reflected, "That teacher taught me world affairs, international politics, English, literature, journalism, writing, speaking, science." Its most ambitious program was Resident Presidents.
The Resident Presidents from the BBC.
A weekly satirical take on the news with two fictional dictators. Olu Shambles and Kibaki Mad were stereotypes of African leaders, but there was often wisdom hidden in their jokes. Although millions of Africans had a sense of ownership over Focus on Africa, they were not consulted. According to reports, not even African staff were asked about the decision. In June 2023, Lillian Landor, director of the BBC World Service, informed employees their programs would be cut and then refused to take further questions. About 200 jobs in Africa were lost, and the BBC claimed the problem was lack of funding from a right-wing government in the UK. Whilst 30 million was cut from Africa funding, the BBC Match of the Day football programme continues to cost over 70 million a year. The BBC has claimed that it's modernising its Africa output by going digital and moving to podcasts, but this has cut their audience in Africa by at least half. Podcasts like The Comb, which shares stories from Africa, are nice to listen to, but they aren't a replacement for rigorous reporting and news analysis. The Focus on Africa podcast is not the same as the radio version, and its audience has grown smaller. The Africa Live internet feed is only useful for someone with a regular fixed broadband connection. Perhaps the best addition to the BBC's Africa content has been Africa Eye. Launched in 2018, Africa Eye is an investigative journalism brand. Each investigation is a collaboration between local African journalists and the BBC. Episodes of Africa Eye have forced African officials to resign over issues of corruption. The TB Joshua expose in 2024 is their biggest story yet. But the stories tend to focus on sex, violence, and corruption. Although Africa Eye is excellent at what it does, without support from other Africa programs, it presents a very negative picture of the continent. Overall, the BBC's Africa reporting has sharply declined. It has lost touch with millions of Africans who encounter a price barrier when accessing its online content. Its brand has shifted from geopolitics and Pan-African creativity to podcasts and undercover investigations. Is there any BBC Africa content today which could inspire the loyalty Kwaku Kumi felt for Focus on Africa? Reflecting on the programme's final episode, he wrote, "I could not stand the anguish as my teacher's life ebbed away before my eyes. It was as if a chunk of me was also dying." As the BBC has lost touch with Africa, it has left behind an empty void, a gap which may soon be filled by others.
If you enjoyed this content and would like more, please subscribe to the Africa Review on YouTube.